Welcome to Fireside History, where the past comes to life. If you enjoy this retelling, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to hear more. The D-Day landings, 1944. The Battle of Normandy, World War II. The sky was black over the English Channel, but not with stars. It was filled with the faint buzz of engines, hundreds of them, stretching in long ghostly formations from the airfields of southern England to the coast of France. Below, the sea churned under the weight of steel and salt, a colossal armada sliding through the dark, unseen but unstoppable. Somewhere out there, behind those clouds and waves, history was about to come ashore. It had been years in the making, years of retreat, resistance and raw survival. Since the fall of France in 1940, the dream of returning, of liberating Europe from Hitler's grip, had haunted every Allied leader. But dreams don't win wars. Planning does. They called it Operation Overlord, a plan so vast it defied belief. 5 beaches, over 5,000 vessels, nearly 160,000 men on the first day alone. And that was just the beginning. It would be the largest seaborne invasion in human history, and it had to succeed. There would be no second chance. The man who bore the weight of that responsibility was General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Calm, courteous, determined. The night before the invasion, he scribbled 2 notes, one to be released if they succeeded, and one if they failed. In the latter, he took full responsibility. No excuses, just 4 sentences. I have withdrawn the troops. My decision to attack at this time and place was based upon the best information available. The troops, the air, and the navy did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone. He put the note in his pocket and went to meet his men. On the ground, soldiers passed the hours with forced banter. Letters were read, rosary beads gripped, cigarettes lit with trembling hands. Some were veterans, North Africa, Sicily, Anzio. Others had never seen combat, 19, maybe 20, faces still soft with youth. One British paratrooper, Private William Carter of the 6th Airborne, later said, "You could hear the engines, feel the metal hull vibrating, but the loudest thing was your own heart. I just kept thinking, this is it, this is it." And then the jump light turned green. Shortly after midnight on June 6th, the first wave of Allied airborne troops began to fall from the sky. British and American paratroopers, glider infantry, pathfinders, tens of thousands of them, their parachutes bloomed above Normandy like flowers in the night. The land beneath was unfamiliar, and the drop zones scattered. Fog, flak, confusion. Many units landed miles off target. Some drowned in flooded fields. Others crashed through rooftops or found themselves alone in pitch-black hedgerows. But chaos breeds opportunity. Small bands of paratroopers ambushed convoys, blew bridges, sowed panic. The Germans couldn't tell where the main attack would come. A handful of men took entire towns, with nothing but rifles, grenades, and the element of surprise. The invasion had begun before the beaches even saw daylight. Back across the channel, the sea convoys were inching closer. 5,000 ships of all shapes and sizes, from sleek destroyers and battleships to flat-bottomed landing craft bobbing in the swell like bath toys. Men were crammed shoulder to shoulder, seasick, cold, soaked from the spray. Some vomited, others prayed, all of them waited. The air filled with the clatter of metal, bayonets being fixed, ammo belts checked, helmets tapped for luck. Aboard one American landing craft, a 22-year-old from Kansas turned to his buddy and said, Let's just get off this boat. I don't care what's waiting. I just can't stand the waiting anymore. At 5:30, the bombardment began. Naval guns thundered in unison, shells the size of motorcycles shrieking toward the French coast. Boom, boom, boom. The horizon lit up in flashes. Batteries at Pointe du Hoc, pillboxes at Omaha, machine gun nests along the bluffs, all targeted. Some were hit, others weren't. Many were buried deep enough to ride out the storm. The Germans dug in behind thick concrete, braced themselves. They knew what was coming. They had been expecting it for months. But not here, not now. They believed the attack would come at Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point between Britain and France. Even as the first Allied troops splashed ashore in Normandy, Hitler still refused to believe it was the real invasion. The beaches were codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword, 5 fronts, 5 different nightmares. Utah Beach, furthest west, was a stroke of luck. American troops landed slightly off target and avoided the worst of the German defences. Resistance was light. Within hours, the beach was secure. But Omaha was carnage. The tide was high, the water cold and fast, and the German 352nd Infantry, some of Hitler's most experienced troops, were waiting. They had elevated positions, interlocking machine guns, mortars zeroed in. Every inch of sand was covered. The moment those landing ramps dropped, the slaughter began. Men were cut down in the surf. Equipment sank. Bodies floated. It was chaos. A young lieutenant from Pennsylvania recalled, "There was no cover, just sand, barbed wire, and death. We had to crawl over bodies to move. My rifle jammed. I used it like a club." Another soldier, wounded but alive, whispered to a medic, "Tell my mother I wasn't afraid." But they kept coming, wave after wave, dragging wounded, clearing mines, crawling up the shingle. Flamethrowers roared, engineers blew paths through obstacles, rangers scaled cliffs at Pointe du Hoc with grappling hooks and rope ladders, dodging grenades from above. Against all odds, they gained ground. By midday, American forces had clawed a foothold on Omaha. Smoke curled from the bluffs. Craters marked the sand. Men stood where others had fallen, staring back at the sea they'd just crossed. Behind them more were coming. Tanks, trucks, bulldozers, supply jeeps. The logistical engine of the free world rolling ashore. Farther east, British and Canadian forces stormed Gold, Juno, and Sword. At Juno, the Canadians faced fierce resistance, machine gun fire raking their landing craft. Some companies lost over 50% of their men before reaching the dunes. But they fought on, clearing trenches, house to house, street to street, and by nightfall they had linked up with British forces advancing from Sword. Together they began pushing inland. The German response was sluggish. Commanders were caught off guard. Communications disrupted. The Atlantic Wall, Hitler's supposedly impregnable coastal defence, had been breached in less than a day. But it wasn't over. Not even close. The beaches were only the beginning. Beyond them lay the bocage, a maze of thick hedgerows, ancient stone farmhouses, and narrow lanes, perfect ground for defenders. And soon, the real test would begin. By the end of the first day, the Allies had landed more than 130,000 men. Thousands were dead. Thousands more wounded or missing. But the invasion had succeeded. The beachheads were linked. Supplies were pouring in. The Allies had their foothold. Still, victory came at a terrible price. Medics worked without sleep. Chaplains moved from one shattered soul to the next. Graves were dug in the sand. On one stretch of Omaha Beach, a soldier planted a makeshift cross using a rifle and helmet. He whispered a name, and walked away without looking back. This was only the first chapter in the Battle of Normandy. The days ahead would bring hedgerow warfare, tank battles, brutal counterattacks. But the landings, this single monumental day, had changed the course of the war. The tide had turned, the Allies were back in Europe, and nothing would ever be the same. History often turns in silence, quiet meetings, secret orders, lines drawn on maps. But not this time. This time it turned with the roar of engines, the scream of shells, the cry of the wounded, and the steady, unbroken footsteps of men walking ashore into hell and refusing to stop. The beach was behind them now. But the war was just beginning. For the men of the Allied invasion force, the next phase would be worse. Not because of scale or numbers or chaos, but because of the terrain. They had stepped into a trap. Not one built with walls or wire, but by nature. The Normandy bocage. It was a patchwork of sunken lanes and hedgerows, earth embankments overgrown with thick, ancient vegetation. Each field was like a walled garden, flanked by banks and trees 2 meters high. From the air, it looked like countryside. From the ground, it was a maze, a fortress, and a killer. German troops retreating from the beaches had fallen back into the bocage, and they used it well. Machine guns behind every bush, snipers concealed in the treetops, mortars hidden under barns, every turn of the road a potential ambush. The Allies, trained for open warfare and rapid movement, now had to fight a battle of inches. A young infantryman in the 29th Division described it like this. You didn't see the enemy, you heard him. 1 minute it's quiet, then someone screams and it all explodes. We cleared fields by crawling through ditches, tossing grenades into hedgerows, and hoping we hit something. Another soldier remembered the silence, how quiet it all was between the bursts of violence. It wasn't a front line, it was 1,000 front lines. Every man was on his own front. The tanks fared no better. Sherman after Sherman was funneled down narrow paths, perfect kill zones, hidden anti-tank guns fired from close range, Panzerfausts struck from behind fences. It was claustrophobic, brutal, relentless. The Germans, despite their losses, fought with cunning. The SS Panzer divisions, hardened, ruthless and fanatical, were now in the fight. And they weren't just stalling, they were trying to crush the beachhead. On the 13th of June, just 1 week after D-Day, the Allies suffered a sobering shock at the village of Villers-Bocage. A British advance was ambushed by a single Tiger tank commanded by Michael Wittmann, one of Germany's most lethal tank aces. He destroyed over a dozen Allied vehicles in minutes, tanks, troop carriers, jeeps, before disappearing into the hedgerows. His attack was a stark reminder. The Germans were far from beaten, and in the right hands their weapons could turn the tide of a whole engagement. The Tiger, one tank. 60 tons of steel. A high-velocity 88mm gun capable of piercing any Allied armour at long range. Heavily armoured, near invulnerable from the front. Its engine roared like thunder. Its silhouette, unmistakable, but it wasn't invincible. It was slow. It guzzled fuel. And in the close quarters of Normandy's lanes, its advantages were limited. Ambushes worked both ways. Allied forces began adapting. Shermans were outfitted with makeshift ploughs to rip through hedgerows. Engineers strapped explosives to tree trunks to blast open new paths. Air power was called in more aggressively. Rocket-armed typhoons diving low to smash enemy armour. Bit by bit, the Allies learned how to fight in the bocage, and they began to push. By late June, the British were pressing toward Caen, a city that had been a primary objective on D-Day, but was still in German hands weeks later. The Germans knew its importance. Caen controlled major road networks and a route toward Paris. It was also a matter of prestige, and Hitler had ordered it held at all costs, so it became a fortress. SS Panzer divisions dug in, artillery ringed the suburbs, snipers turned every rooftop into a death trap. The British launched multiple offensives, Operation Perch, then Epsom, then Charnwood. Each one ground forward in bloody, frustrating fits. Progress measured not in miles, but in city blocks, church to church, basement to basement. In the fields to the west, American forces launched their own series of brutal assaults, fighting to take the town of St. Lo. The terrain didn't help, neither did the weather. Rain turned roads into mud. Airstrikes were often grounded. Still, they fought. Some of the fiercest fighting came during Operation Cobra, a breakout attempt in late July, spearheaded by General Omar Bradley. But first, the Americans needed to clear a path. And so, on July 25th, more than 3,000 Allied bombers filled the skies over German positions. The bombardment was devastating, but also chaotic. Some bombs fell short, killing hundreds of American troops. Tanks were overturned. Infantry units shredded. The survivors kept moving. Once the smoke cleared, American armour surged through the gap. Columns of Shermans, infantry riding on the decks, dust clouds rising. This was no longer a crawl. It was a breakthrough. German lines buckled. Commanders tried to regroup, but too many units were destroyed or cut off. Retreat turned into collapse. It was the moment Eisenhower had waited for. The Allies were finally out of the bocage, and they were moving fast. In the chaos, one young corporal, unnamed in the records, wrote home to his sister, "We were like dogs off the leash. The Germans ran. We ran after them, and it felt good. It felt like justice." But the retreating enemy wasn't finished yet. As German forces fell back toward the town of Falaise, a new danger emerged. They were regrouping in a pocket, a bulge of land surrounded on three sides by the Allies, but not yet sealed. Inside, tens of thousands of German troops, tanks, guns and supply vehicles. The Allies knew what had to be done. Close the pocket, trap them, crush what remained of Hitler's Western Army. What followed was a battle unlike any seen before. The roads around Falaise turned into a slaughterhouse. Bombers raked columns of vehicles. Artillery exploded in every direction. Tanks tried to force their way out and were hit by rockets, fire and shells. The air stank of fuel, blood and burning flesh. Entire divisions were destroyed. Some German soldiers threw down their weapons and fled on foot. Others were cut down as they ran. A few escaped. Most did not. The Falaise Pocket, as it came to be known, marked the end of the German presence in Normandy. It was a massacre, but a necessary one. The door to Paris was now wide open. By August 1944, the Allies had broken out of Normandy. The cost was staggering. In less than 3 months, over 425,000 men were killed, wounded, or missing across both sides. Entire towns had ceased to exist. Normandy, once pastoral and quiet, was now cratered, scorched, and soaked in blood. But the sacrifice had achieved something unthinkable only months before. Germany was retreating, and liberation was coming. The Battle of Normandy didn't just win ground. It changed everything. It proved that the Atlantic Wall could be broken, that Hitler's war machine was not invincible, and that the Allies, British, American, Canadian, French and more, could fight side by side, bleed together, and win. It revealed new ways of warfare. Airborne assaults, amphibious logistics, close air-ground coordination, a blueprint for modern combined arms strategy, and it brought the war home to the Nazis. For the first time since 1940, they were truly on the back foot. Normandy was not the end, but it was the turning. From the cliffs of Pointe du Hoc to the fields of Falaise, the price of freedom was etched into the earth with fire and blood. And the men who paid it asked for nothing in return. Except that we remember, the pocket was closed. German units around Falaise, trapped, bombed, slaughtered, had either surrendered or been destroyed. The fields were littered with wreckage, burnt-out trucks, scattered helmets, dead horses, broken rifles, and bodies. So many bodies. A Canadian soldier described it simply, "You couldn't walk 10 feet without stepping on a corpse. We didn't speak, we just moved through it like ghosts." The Battle of Normandy was over, but the war was still burning, and now the Allies were moving. Fast. The roads, once clogged with landing craft and supply trucks, now filled with tanks, motorized infantry, and convoys stretching for miles. In the west, the Americans surged through Brittany, liberating port towns one after another. In the east, the British and Canadians moved with quiet determination, clearing village after village. But all eyes were fixed on one city. Paris. The City of Light had been under Nazi occupation for over 4 years. Its citizens had suffered curfews, food shortages, arrests, executions. Its landmarks, the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, Notre Dame, all stood under the boot of the swastika. But resistance simmered beneath the surface. Saboteurs, underground networks, students with pamphlets, railway workers delaying troop movements, artists hiding Jews in cellars. They had waited for this moment, and now it was coming. By mid-August, as Allied armour approached the Seine, the French resistance launched a full-scale uprising inside Paris. Barricades were built, police stations were seized, German troops were harassed and outmanoeuvred by guerrilla fighters in their own streets. The city teetered. Rather than allow Paris to be destroyed, as Hitler had ordered, the local German commander, General Dietrich von Choltitz, chose defiance. He surrendered. And on the 25th of August 1944, Free French forces entered Paris to scenes of utter jubilation. Crowds surged through the streets. Flags appeared in every window. Strangers embraced. Champagne flowed. It was liberation, and the bells of Notre Dame rang out, not for an empire or a general or a politician, but for the people. Among them, Charles de Gaulle, the voice of Free France, marched through the streets in his uniform, upright and unsmiling. He gave a single speech at the Hôtel de Ville, standing under a giant French flag. Paris, Paris outraged, Paris broken, Paris martyred, but Paris liberated, liberated by itself, liberated by its people with the help of the armies of France, with the support and help of all of France, of fighting France, of the only France, of the real France, of eternal France. His voice echoed like thunder. The city, and the nation, had risen from the ashes. But the fighting did not stop. The German army was still vast, still deadly, and retreating toward the homeland, where new defensive lines were being hastily formed. As summer faded into autumn, the Allies crossed the Seine and pushed deeper into occupied Europe. But supply lines were stretched thin, roads were cratered, bridges blown, and resistance stiffened. The Siegfried Line, Germany's final wall of defence, loomed ahead like a scar. The war would go on, through the bitter winter of the Ardennes, through the bridges of the Rhine, through the ruins of Berlin. But Normandy had been the turning point, the spark, the moment the tide shifted and never returned. For the men who survived it, Normandy never left them. The smell of cordite, the weight of a rifle, the scream of a wounded friend, the taste of sand and salt and fear. Some spoke of it years later, others never did. But they carried it, always, not just the trauma, but the pride, because they had done what history demanded, and they had done it together. The tools they carried told the story in metal and fire. The M1 Garand, American, semi-automatic, reliable. The sharp ping of its ejecting clip became a symbol of Allied firepower. The Lee Enfield, British, bolt action, fast and accurate in trained hands, its weight comforting and familiar. The Bren gun, the MG-42, the Thompson, the Sten. Names that echoed through foxholes and hedgerows, bayonets fixed, grenades clutched, helmets scratched with initials or names of sweethearts. Each man a world, a story, a sacrifice. Among the graves in Normandy today, there are crosses and stars of David. French, British, American, Canadian, even German. Some graves are marked, others lost to time. But all share the same soil, a land they fought over, bled into, and gave back to the living. In the months that followed, D-Day, over 2 million Allied troops would pass through Normandy. Ports were rebuilt, roads paved, airfields carved from farmland. The liberation of France was underway. And though it would take another year of brutal fighting to reach Berlin, the outcome was no longer in doubt. D-Day, and everything that followed, had made victory inevitable. The question now was only how long it would take, and how many more would fall before the end. The Battle of Normandy reshaped the world. It was a triumph of planning, courage, and cooperation. A military operation without equal, combining sea, air, and land in an orchestra of destruction and liberation. It forged bonds between nations that endure to this day. It gave rise to NATO, to post-war Europe, to the balance of powers we still live with. But more than strategy, more than geopolitics, Normandy became a symbol of resistance, of redemption, of what free people can achieve when faced with tyranny. It showed that evil can be confronted, that darkness doesn't last forever. That courage, even when terrified, cold and outgunned, can change the course of history. In Normandy, the echoes are still there. You can hear them in the wind on the cliffs of Pointe du Hoc, in the silence among the crosses at Colleville, in the waves washing the sand at Omaha, where the surf once ran red. The men who came ashore on June 6th did not come to conquer. They came to free. And in doing so, they gave the 20th century its second chance. Thank you for listening to Fireside History. If this story moved you, please like, comment and subscribe. Your support helps keep the fire burning.